everyone. I'm Maritza and welcome to my podcast, Things You Can't Unhear. Today on Things You Can't Unhear, we are heading to Oregon, USA to interview the one and only modern-day spiritual leader, Neale Donald Walsch. I am so overwhelmed with joy to have the chance to speak with him directly today. And for those who know of him and his work, you'll understand why I feel so overjoyed. But for those who don't yet know of Neale, be prepared to be moved, transformed, and awakened in some way. Neale is most well known for the Conversations with God series of books that have touched millions of lives around the world and have been translated into 37 languages. Conversations with God Book 1 occupied the New York Times bestseller list for over 2.5 years, and he has recently released Book 4 of that series, subtitled Awaken the Species. The books came about in 1999 when Neale had reached a really low point in his life and desperately needed answers. Awoken during his sleep one night, he started writing his frustrations to God on paper. And he got the answers with clarity and grace. The dialogue that he had with God has been shared with us over 4 life-changing books. Hello from Australia, all the way to Oregon, USA. You've been such a source of joy and wonder for me through your series of books, Conversations with God.
I'm very happy that you had the experience that you're describing. I can't take any credit for it. I merely took dictation. I wrote down what I was hearing, but I do feel very good about the fact that you've had such a positive experience. Thank you for telling me this.
In your own personal journey, you did turn such a low point into such a growth situation and spiraled your whole life into a new direction.
Yes, it sure did, although I have to admit that I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I hadn't received the messages of Conversations with God, but somehow intuitively I managed to see what was going on in my life. And for those who don't know my life story, what was going on is that I was homeless. I was living on the street. I was what they say in America, what we call a street person. I was a street person living on the sidewalk and sleeping in a park. I did have a tent, to be fair. I had a tent, and so I had the ability to get out of the rain. But I wasn't able to get out of the cold. It's just as cold in a tent as it is outside almost. So I was living in a tent, and not for a week or two or maybe a month or so, but for a year. 2 weeks shy of 1 year, I was living outside in the weather. And so I had reached rock bottom. I had nowhere to live. I was homeless. I was a homeless person living in a tent in a park. And I sleeping in a sleeping bag. I was grateful that I had a sleeping bag, but that was it. 2 pair of pants, 1 pair of shoes, 3 shirts, and that was about all I had to my name. And I was 50 years old, not a young man. I wasn't 26 or 35 or 42. I was a 50-year-old man, and I had reached what I thought was the end of the line. So you're right. I did manage to see that completely turn around in my life, but I can't pretend that I did it on purpose. It just happened that way. But then after I heard the messages of Conversations with God, I began to utilize the tool of gratitude for everything that occurs in my life.
Unbelievable. One of the reasons I started my podcast, Things You Can't Unhear, is that I want people to have the knowledge and power to change their life and to not have to wait until rock bottom to make a change. And recently I heard Vishen Lakiani from Mind Valley say something that really was so refreshing. He said, you don't have to grow through struggle. You can grow through the active process of growing as your primary reason or your primary motivator.
When things are looking dark, we tend to assign them a very high level of reality. That is, we think it's really a dark event or a black moment or something bad is happening, when such a thing is really impossible, given the identity given our true identity. So if we really are individuations of divinity, then nothing bad can happen to us.
Mm.
Things occur for sure, and things that we call bad or not welcome or not accepted. But in fact, every occurrence, every event, every situation, every circumstance in life, in my understanding, is nothing more than another opportunity, maybe the next grandest opportunity, for us to announce and declare, express and fulfill, become and experience who we really are. So the message of Conversations with God is that all things that happen are for our own benefit, or all change is change for the better, because everything that occurs is perfectly designed to give us an opportunity to express our true nature at the next highest level. So the place to start, I tell everyone who is interested in knowing what Conversations with God has to say on this subject, the place to start is with gratitude. Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me. Thank you, God, for placing this opportunity before me, for bringing me this chance to announce and declare, express and fulfill, become and experience who I really am. Now, the wonder of the energy of gratitude is that it not only allows us to see what is occurring in a different way, in a new way, but it changes the energetic that is projected by us onto the circumstance. And that shift in energetic is not a small thing. It's a major aspect of what continues to create and produce the outcomes that occur and that arise in our life.
I absolutely agree with you. Even if you're in the most dire situation, there is some glimmer of something that you should be grateful for or can be grateful for. You know, the sun has risen that day, the moon has set that night. If there's something small in that, you can be always grateful for. And I think, like you said, it is such a powerful thing.
Yes, and if I may, not only grateful for those secondary or tertiary events, the sunrise or whatever, but I mean for the event itself. I'm talking about embracing gratitude for exactly what's happening. Losing our job, having difficulty in relationship, the physical health challenge that we may be facing, falling down the stairs and breaking our ankle, whatever it might be. Actually be grateful for specifically what's happening, for falling down the stairs and breaking your ankle, for losing your job, for going bankrupt, for having relationship difficulties, or whatever it is that you have made a judgment about that you think should not be happening and that you wish were not happening.
Now, in your earliest books, you really look at the individual a lot more, but your last Conversations with God, book 4, Awaken the Species, and The Essential Path, which is about to come out, really focus on humanity as a whole, the collective species. This is so important to our transformation as humans. What do you see as the biggest problem in the world today?
Well, the biggest problem in the world today, as I observe it, is that nobody knows what the biggest problem in the world today is, or not very many do, of the 8 or 7.5 billion people. There's a small handful of those who really, from my observation, understand what the biggest problem in the world today is. We can see the result of the biggest problem. We can see the fallout we can see the outcome, and we can put that in one word. The outcome of the biggest problem in the world today is alienation. I have never seen our species and the members of the human race so alienated from each other as I'm seeing in our days and times. People in different political groups, people in different nationalities, people from different religions, people in different social, economic constructions, people with different sexual preferences and sexual orientations, people, anyone who's different from anyone else are finding themselves to be increasingly alienated as a whole group, as a subgroup within our society from the rest of society. It's those immigrants that are causing the problem. No. It's those unwanted gays. No. It's those crazy liberals. No. It's those conservatives, those unyielding, unbending conservatives. No. Wait a minute. It's those angry women. No, it's those domineering men. No, I know what it is. It's those. It's those others. And I've never really seen, and we've always had a little bit of that in our human society, but boy, I've never seen it the way I'm seeing it now on the planet. And there are whole movements in the world right now, in certain countries, to get rid of or push out or eliminate or at least marginalize and minimalize people who do not belong to the select group, to the good guys and the bad guys. And wow, it's just an amazing thing that I'm seeing, and not just in my country, but to some degree all over the world. And what's sad about it is that, to go back to where I was a minute ago, nobody understands why it's happening. What is causing all of this sudden eruption of alienation? People alienated from other people and making everyone else the cause of all of our problems. And what I observe is that the answer is the biggest problem in the world today is our misunderstanding about who we are, why we are here, and most fundamentally, a misunderstanding of our true nature. There's an old saying that we hear a lot. Well, it's just human nature. It's just human nature. But most people are misunderstanding and have misunderstood what human nature really is. What is the true nature of humans? And that's a question that our species is going to have to answer very quickly in the next 15 to 20 years, or we're going to be in much deeper trouble than we are right now around the world. What is the true nature of human beings? Are we simply physical entities? You might say chemical creatures made up of skin and bones, cells? Are we like really just highly sophisticated mammals, not unlike a dolphin or a whale? Or maybe a bird in the sky or a fish in the sea? More complex, for sure, to be fair. More complex, more sophisticated. But in the end, when all is said and done, nothing more than a highly sophisticated mammal. Is that really the sum total of who we are? Or is it in fact possible that we are spiritual entities, that there is an aspect of who we are that is non-physical, that we are actually spiritual entities having a physical experience? That's not a small question, and the answer is not a small answer. Because if we answer that the second is what's true, that we actually are spiritual entities having a physical experience, then we have to ask a second question. Are we simply 7.5 billion separate spiritual entities? Or is it possible that we are simply individual expressions of a single spiritual entity?
If we all look at ourselves as one, then the separation will not exist. Is that right?
Well, of course it's right. And the profound implication of that is that if separation does not exist, and we are all simply individual expressions of the single energy the single life force that we call divinity, if that's who we all are, we would never allow 656 children to die every hour on this planet of starvation. We would never allow 1.5 billion of us to go through this very day without a single drop of pure water. And they've never had any pure water in their entire life. Now, you might say, well, these are just inconveniences. You know, like 2.5 billion people. I don't know whether you know it or not. But as we talk today, 2.5 billion people, that's about 1/4, more than 1/4 of the human race, do not have indoor plumbing. Can you imagine that they still do not have indoor plumbing? 1/4 of the human race in the year of our Lord 2019. How is such a thing possible?
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you was to help with this, to help awaken the species. What behaviours do we need to look at within ourselves to help to do that?
Well, the first thing we have to do is end our thought that we're separate from anyone else. I mean, I do understand that there's a physical distance between things, just as there's a physical distance between your living room and your dining room. But where does the air of the living room end and the air of the dining room begin? Or is it possible that the air of the living room and the air of the dining room is the same air, simply located in a different physical location? I use it as an analogy. It's a metaphor. I use the metaphor to help us understand that really, even though we are individuated souls, or spirits, if you please, we are not separated in any true sense of the word, in any sense of the physics of it. In terms of the physics of it, we are not separated at all. We are simply stretching the energy that exists between us. So there is what you would call space between us, but we're not separate. Any more, if I could use another metaphor, this is a wonderful metaphor that I was given in conversations with God. We're not separate from each other any more than a wave is separate from the ocean. When the wave arises from the ocean and crashes upon the beach, we don't call the wave something other than the ocean. In fact, it is the ocean in individuated form. It's not something other than the ocean, and it's not separate from the ocean. But when it expresses its waveness, if I could use such a word, when it's through expressing as a wave, it recedes back into the ocean. It returns whence it comes and becomes one with the ocean once again in larger ways. But it's never not the ocean. And in the same way, you are never not the essential essence of the universe. You're simply an individual expression of the central energy of the universe, or what I would call in my language, God. Now, if we decide to embrace such an idea, we would begin to interact with everyone else on the planet in an entirely different way from the way that we do now. We would never allow so many billions of people to be suffering in the way they're suffering. We would put a stop to it immediately. I want to repeat a statistic that I gave us a little while ago, because most people don't know this. Most people do not know that 656 children are dying on this planet of starvation every single hour. Now, what's sad about that is that we have the ability to stop. All we have to do is make it a priority. What would cause us to make it a priority to stop the suffering of humanity? We have the ability to do that. What would cause us to decide to do that would be if we collectively embrace the truth of our nature. If we understood that human nature is the expression of our divine self. But it's difficult, to embrace such a notion when virtually every religion, every mainline religion, and most of the smaller religions fundamentally deny that we are one with the divine. Rather, they teach us and have been teaching us for thousands of years that we are separate from the divine. The divine is over there, way up there someplace, presumably. We are down here. And our job is to somehow get back home and to somehow reconnect with the divine. If we even think that we are spiritual beings, there are billions of people who think that's a nonsensical idea. They say, no, we are just mammals, like fishes in the sea, like dolphins and whales, like birds in the air. And when we die, we die. That's the beginning and the end of it. So there you have it. That's the major decision that human beings have to make. We begin with a decision. I call it humanity's daring decision. And if we are to survive as a species and have our life as we know it survive, we are going to have to make the choice to take the essential path. The essential path is the path back to the truth of who we really are.
And it is, in fact, essential. I remember a comment in your book that made me just pause and think for a long time, and it was, group meditation has the power to stop a war. Us coming together as a collective has enough power to do so much good.
Yes, I agree with you. So we have to make a decision. Everyone within the sound of my voice has to make a choice, an individual choice. They have to answer a simple question. Who am I? Who am I? And where am I? And why am I where I am? I call those the fundamental questions of life. And what's interesting about that is that the largest number of people on the earth have never asked, much less answered, those questions.
Mm-hmm. You know, there is a quote that I've also put up on my fridge for my children to read and my husband to read and myself to read every morning. And I walk past it several times a day, and it gives me a reminder. And it's something you said that's so powerful. Your life is not just about you, or it's not about you. It is about everybody whose life you've touched and the way you touched it.
And when you decide to live your life in that way, watch the changes that occur. Not overnight, not in a week or two, but over a period of months, you'll just suddenly begin to see a whole different experience of your life. Everything will change, and you'll begin to see a shift in the energetics of life itself. Or, and by the way, this is just what Conversations with God said. It's the way the dialogue put it. Someone else made the same statement many, many thousands of years ago. He said, do unto others as you would have it done unto you. It's the same truth. There's only one truth. And the truth has been given to us in 100 different ways by 1,000 different messengers across many, many, many centuries. The question is not whether we've received this wisdom before. The question is, what would it take for us to listen?
I think we go through the motions of life too, and it's get the job, get the house, get the car, and then we reach a point and we're like, what is life actually all about? How do we find that how and that why and that what we are supposed to be?
I think we simply find it out by doing two things. One, listen to and respond in a positive way to the wisdom that has been shared with us by spiritual teachers for thousands of years. There's nothing new here. This is not new age. This is not new thought. I'm saying things that have been said by many, many people, far more insightful and wisdom-filled than I will ever be. But they've been saying the same thing for thousands of years. So we start by listening to the wisdom that's been given us by the wonderful wisdom teachers through the centuries. And then after listening to that, we begin to change the way we move through the world. Just as we said a minute ago, understanding that my life is not about me. It's about everyone whose life I touch and the way in which I touch it. Now, the irony of that is that when I choose that as my life priority, it turns out in a circular fashion that life is about me, in the sense that the energy that I project into the world is projected right back onto me. Or as the young people say these days, what goes around comes around. So we find out that what we send out into the world comes back to us in any event. So by that means, in that way, life turns out that it is about me. But it starts off in an entirely different way than we thought that it did.
I agree, and I think it's so important too, Neale, to pass all of this on to our children. So, they're our future. What is your greatest advice? I know you have children yourself. What is your greatest advice to raising aware and awakened children?
Well, I think that parents, I've written a book on this topic, by the way, Conversations with God for Parents. And in that book, I list a number of statements from Conversations with God that can be easily shared with children in an age-appropriate way, in ways that children can really understand, even when they're very young, when they're 4 and 5, 6 and 8, 9 and 10, and going through their teenage years. I think that we begin, and of course children are the future. This is a statement that's pretty clear and pretty obvious. Well, what do we share with our children? I think it's important to begin with giving them a child's understanding of who we are. Who are we? And what is our purpose for being here? That is, what is life really all about? Of course, I wouldn't share with a 7 or 9-year-old, or much less a 4 or 5-year-old, the deepest philosophical understandings of Conversations with God, or for that matter, Socrates or Plato, or any of the great philosophers and teachers through the years. But there are simple and easy ways to help children understand more and more and more about the essential truths of life. And the first place I would start is by watching what children themselves observe. Children have, it's interesting, if you ever watch a 4-year-old in the backyard, maybe they find a worm on the ground or an ant hill, and they see the ants scurrying about or whatever they find. Children have a deep reverence for life. It's not the first impulse of children to step on a worm or to destroy the anthill. They're curious, they want to know what's going on, and children have a deep respect for all living things, not just their pet dog or their pet cat, but for most living things. I can recall, I have a kind of a sad, funny story to tell about that, but when I was 7 years old, my father took me fishing. He thought it would be, a nice parental thing to do, to take his son fishing. So he took me out of the boat to go fishing with him. And he actually, as it happened, he caught a really big fish, as it happened. And he pulled it into the boat. It was a very large fish. He took it off the hook, and then as he was rebaiting his line to try to catch another fish, while he wasn't looking, I picked the fish off the bottom of the boat and threw it back into the water. And when my father turned around from his tackle box and he saw the fish gone, at first he thought that the fish was big enough to actually jump out of the boat, but then he realized probably not. And he looked at me, he said, "Son, did you throw that fish back in the water?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because he couldn't breathe. He was gasping for breath. And I had to throw him back in the water to give him a chance to live." At 7 years old, there was no way in the world I was going to let that fish die right in front of my face. And so, if we watch children, they already remember much of what we think we have to teach them. The sad thing about our interaction with children, not in every case, but in many cases, is that we unteach them. That is, we teach them the opposite of what they already know. And my dog's out there barking in the next room. But we teach them what we don't want them to hold as their own idea, and that's sad. And I think we have an opportunity to change our mind about what we're going to share with our children. Apparently, there's someone at the front door in my own home here. And I'm sorry that's happening, but it is, and it's real life.
That's right. And would you like to answer the door?
One home. No. I'm going to let it be what it is. I'm on a podcast in Australia, and that's what's true.
That's where we are. I have two children, a 7 and a 9-year-old, and I think those ages are such a delicate age. And when the plate is put down in front of them now, they look at it and they do question what they're eating, and it's such an innocence to them realizing that they're eating meat and it comes from an animal.
Yes, and it's also important to know that they're essential beings of the universe, including animals. That no one dies at a time or in a way that is not of their choosing. So it's been a tradition among human beings for millennia, not decades, not centuries, but for millennia. That is, for many thousands of years, that we honor the animals on this planet, and we, yes, sometimes use them to nourish ourselves.
That takes us into a very interesting question, and something you just said. Every person chooses when they pass. That is a huge statement. Can you explain that a bit further for us?
Well, I think the statement speaks for itself. A conversation with God told us that no one dies at a time or in a way. It's not of their choosing. It's as simple as that. And it would be impossible for that not to be true if human beings really are individuations of divinity. Conversations with God makes an interesting statement, a corollary statement. There are no victims or villains in the world. No one is a victim, not in a spiritual sense. In the human sense, we may consider ourselves to be a victim, but in the spiritual sense, that is at the highest level of understanding, there are no victims and no villains in the world. No one dies at a time or in a way that is not of their choosing. Such a thing would be impossible if we really are individuations of divinity. We need to decide, we have an opportunity to declare, who am I? Who am I? If I really am a spiritual entity having a physical experience, what, if anything, is the connection between the spiritual entity that I am and what I call God? Or is there no connection between me and God and between me and anybody else? These are not insignificant questions. The way we answer these questions will determine how we interact in our lives.
We have, it's been said in your book also that we have many lifetimes and we choose who and what we are going to be born into in this physical life. This is a fascinating thing to think about because we're not taught this. And, it's said in the book too that it's our job to remember why we're here. And is this the meaning of life?
Of course, these are questions that are not taught at school, not taught where they should and could be taught in elementary school. Again, in age-appropriate ways. They're not even brought up in any way. Nobody discusses in 3rd grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, or even in high school. In fact, you could go through a whole 4-year college degree at a university and have nobody ever asked that particular question. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I where I am? What is the true nature of the universe? The true nature of my being? The true essential truth of humanity's experience of itself? And why are we here? What's the point of life? What is the point of all of this? Sadly, these questions are not asked and answered.
What can you say to people who are sometimes not feeling worthy or, just really want to take this first step into a life of gratitude, into helping to awaken the species?
Stop worrying about whether you are worthy. The issue is not whether you're worthy, even if you feel unworthy. You want to get rid of that feeling of not being worthy? Cause someone else to get rid of their feeling of not being worthy. I guarantee you that if you spend the next 120 days, the next 3 or 4 months, making sure that every single person whose life you touch feels reconnected to their own worthiness, reconnected to their own specialness, reconnected to their own sense of who they really are at the highest level. If you spend your life giving people back to themselves, in the end of 120 days of doing that, you will no longer feel unworthy, because what flows through you sticks to you. So make it your job to make certain that the clerk at the grocery store, the man behind the counter at the post office, the policeman walking the beat on the street, the used car salesman, the waitress at the restaurant, and everyone whose life you touch is given some sense of who they are, reminded again of how special they are, thanked in an extraordinarily new way, in a way that reminds them that you have seen a part of them that they may not have been told about by a stranger for a very long time. Give people back to themselves. Stop worrying about whether you think you're worthy. The issue isn't whether you're worthy or not. But if you want to feel worthy, if that's really bothering you, make everyone else, for the next 4 months, feel so worthy that they will never forget that you passed through their life. And then tell me in 4 months how unworthy you feel. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You will be given your own sense of worthiness back, because what you give to another, you give to yourself for a very extraordinary reason. There is only one of us.
So lovely, Neale. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you. God said to me in Conversations with God, what you give to another, whatever it might be, a sense of worthiness or a sense of unworthiness, a sense of their abundance or lack of it, whatever you want more of for yourself, be the source of more of it in the life of another. Those 3 words were profound in book 1 of the Conversations with God series. Be the source. Be the source in the life of another of everything you wish you had more of in your own life. And watch yourself receive what you give away.
Lovely. Beautiful. I appreciate it again. Thank you, Neale. Have a wonderful afternoon, and hopefully you can answer the door and see who's there. Hopefully they're still around for you. And again, thank you for being such a light in my life. I will continue to pass on your message to as many people as I can.
Thank you, my friend. Blessed be.
Well, thank you for listening to my interview with the one and only Neale Donald Walsch. I hope you feel inspired and awakened in some way. To continue the conversation with me, please message me on Instagram at Maritza_Barone, and make sure you subscribe to the show, as we have many more incredible interviews to come. Be happy, be healthy, be conscious, be kind.